Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is Luke with Luke F1 Fantasy with my team selection video for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, which is coming up this weekend. So it's going to be a fun one. The night race is always a fun time under the lights of Las Vegas along the strip. And it is the start of a triple header as we head into the last three races of the 2025 Formula One season. And that means a final push for our teams as we look to climb the ranks, win your mini leagues, claim your bragging rights for another year. So we'll start the video off by doing a recap of my team in Las Vegas. A team of Lando, George, Carlos Sainz, Alonso, Esteban Ocon, McLaren, and Mercedes. So for me, it was just the two transfers. This week I had three transfers going into this team. Leclerc was swapped out for George Russell, and Pierre Gasly was swapped out for Esteban Ocon. Those two transfers on its own netted me a positive. I think I got an extra 30-odd points from removing Leclerc, Gasly out. But it ended up being a decent week. I did climb an extra 40-ish places in the global rank up to 1588. Budget gained about 0.6 million, so up to 135.8. So last couple of weeks, as you've been following the channel, I have put the brakes on budget building and been focusing mainly on points. I've been working, and I know my budget has been stalling a little bit, which is proving to be a little bit more difficult as we look to constructing our teams for the last three races, but still pretty happy with a lot of the teams that I can afford at this 135.8 million. And it wasn't all that good. There was a couple blunders that I made this week, especially when I still had the final fix chip sitting in my back pocket. And another missed opportunity to not play that final fix chip. If I had played it, looking at a couple of different options, swapping Alonso out or swapping Lando out after qualifying, those both probably could have been moves that would net me some points. Lost around about 30-ish points with not going from Norris to Verstappen after qualifying. And looking back, it probably was some hindsight missed there. Verstappen starting at the back, a new engine. He was just primed for getting overtakes and position gains. And it just happened so quickly, right? Getting those two safety cars within basically the first, 10 laps of the race, really just put Verstappen in an advantageous position over all of those backfield markers. And he just went through them with ease. And before the leaders had even done their first pit stop, Verstappen was already, at the back of that top 10. A missed opportunity there. And also the gamble of going from Ocon to Gasly. On paper, I love the differential pick that I made. I'm glad that it ultimately worked out. But interestingly enough, Pierre Gasly and Alpine just around Brazil just tend to just find another 2 or 3 levels. And ultimately, Gasly ended up scoring 4 more points than Ocon did over the course of the weekend. So ultimately, it was a bit of a net loss to my team based on where I came from in Mexico. A global rank of a green arrow getting me up an extra 40 places. Looking into the global rank, I'm about 80 points outside of the top 500. So had I made that choice of going to Verstappen, definitely getting a lot closer to that. So it does feel like top 1K is still achievable. I still have the final fix left. I still have autopilot. Other teams I know still are rocking. Some people still have autopilot and some people still have 3x left. So there's still probably a little bit of expecting a little bit of a rank to hit, but it really all depends on people nailing those as well. So ultimately, there's still a little bit more to play for. A couple of different decisions each week. Playing the chip in the right spot could still make some position gain ranked. And this for me is really just a continuation of my strategy for the last 2 races. Just really trying to nail points, looking for differentials, slightly switching the 2x, jumped off Verstappen in Mexico to Norris, taking those little chances here or there. Of course, when we got to Brazil, a lot of people jumped from Verstappen to Norris, and all of a sudden I was in the majority and not the minority of my 2x driver. What I am seeing is that I do have enough flexibility in my team to make a couple choices here or there that tend to fall within the strong team for the week, but slight differentials. And again, this game really comes down to DNFs. And if you avoid them, you can make some big ranks, especially if they are on the more popular assets. But if you do, also do conversely drop you down a few as well. And that's what we've seen this week. Like Bortoleto owners really suffered from that DNF, and he was a huge popular pick going into this week. So again, it is crunch time for our teams, and just a few decisions each week will be affecting how your points and your rank does. But that is the name of the game, and that is F1 Fantasy in a nutshell. So looking ahead to Vegas, then it is coming down to, again, the 2x decision each week is an important one. So those are probably the two leading candidates for me. Probably the two drivers that are looking the most confident and the most comfortable to win a race each week. Obviously, some track suit teams are a little bit better, as we can see with Vegas, and typically Mercedes being a strong performer here. But I think from a 2x position as who you think is going to take pole position, who you think is going to win the race, subsequently getting a fastest lap, then Norris and Verstappen tend to be leading those for that. And I think the Verstappen performance in Brazil and recently, Verstappen's performances have been just prime. Max, ultimately, this is almost world championship form from Max. But the as much his points will be somewhat inflated from Brazil. Like, he's not going to start from the pit lane every week. He's not going to have a new engine each week. He's not going to have the benefits of getting two early safety cars where he could take advantage of a pit stop and go on a differential strategy. So all the stars aligned for Verstappen in the last race. So I just want to make sure we use some caution as we go forward. If Verstappen has qualified second or third and had just a very sort of mundane race, plodded around, maybe challenged Norris for the win here or there, Norris and Verstappen's points would have been fairly similar, and then we wouldn't have seen the huge difference. I do want to put a little bit of a lid on Verstappen a little bit, just so we can, again, just reassess the week on its own and not jump into, oh, Verstappen's going to get 60 points each week, and just understanding where those points are coming from. 29 of his points were essentially from race positions gained and race overtakes, which I don't think he's probably had that in sort of multiple races added together. That is my thoughts on Verstappen Norris. It'll still come down to seeing how the practice results look, see how generally the teams are responding after free practice 1, free practice 2, get a sense of, do they feel like the track is suiting them? Do they have their setup correctly? Is the balance right? Max is typically pretty honest about that. Very honest about that in Brazil. But those will be the things that I'm looking at to make those decisions going forward into Vegas. Constructor-wise, this is going to become a decision every week. Do you stick with McLaren, Mercedes as the sort of the primary combo? Are we brave enough to sneak in Red Bull, or do you have the budget to sneak in Red Bull? Are you a person that's looking to gain the upside in pit-stop points and Max taking a win versus a Ferrari where they do have some risk? Or even a Mercedes, where you're considering, like, can that second driver in each team just raise the floor enough that you feel confident? So we're really assessing like a Yuki versus an Oscar versus a Kimi right now, is to see who's having the better week out of those three to help make that second constructor decision, or alternatively, which one's doing the most poorly and can benefit from starting a little bit lower down. Just take advantage of their faster car, more powerful car against the midfield drivers, and can they gain some of those points back from position gain and overtake? So something to consider. And Las Vegas is known for that, right? We have sort of a track that's favoring long, fast straight. It's favoring teams with straight line speed, lots of power. So for those qualifying slightly out of position, not making it out of Q3, Q2, could they end up in a position where they take advantage of these things? We'll have to see how the week goes on. But those are how I'm aligning my thoughts as we get closer to the deadline. Now, I do want to take a look into the transfer targets for this week. So taking a look at our A-tier drivers, certainly Verstappen and Norris definitely have been getting the highest hauls over the last couple of weeks. 63 points for Verstappen, Norris at 49 points. Russell still hanging around there with 23 points in Mexico, 31 in Brazil. So again, just another consistent driver, and definitely a leading contender for someone to be transferred into a team, especially at a place like Las Vegas, where Mercedes have typically done well, Russell enjoys. Oscar Piastri is, as we all know, over the last few races, doesn't seem to be hitting the heights of even where that McLaren car should be heading. He's not challenging for pole. He's not challenging for first. Even getting onto the podium is like a bit of a struggle now. But still at 25.7, still a fairly affordable asset at this time. So again, if you can win some budget around, and he would be an interesting asset to have just purely based on. B-tiers is getting to be proven to be a little bit more challenging to find our picks. And this really comes down to, because we're recording this on a Monday, And because we're taking the strategy of points over budget, the budget builder is not really telling us too much. Obviously, we have our leaders. We have Behrman that needs a minus 30 to secure a point 0.6, or a Gasly to score a minus 11 to score a point 0.6. And there perhaps is some argument to be putting them in, especially if your budget is a little bit like mine. You've been stumbling a little bit, starting to see that maybe the flexibility isn't quite there as much as you'd like. But also, I don't want to make short-term decisions if they're also not going to be the best ones for my points perspective as well. However, that being said, we know how great Behrman has been performing over the last few weeks. Definitely has some 30-pointers in there. The Haas is looking really strong. They did bring some upgrades in Austin, which seem to be carrying over. Was one of the reasons why I brought Ocon into my team, just being a bit more of affordable. Haas for me, like 2.2 million lower than 2.2 million lower than Ocon. That was my thinking, kind of get someone who's in a bit more of a fresher car, new upgrades, less money, and a differential to Gasly. There's just lots to like about a lot of different B tiers. Kimi Antonelli, again, someone else who has typically done well out of these. You can see it fine on Twitter. There's non-European sort of tracks that he's just excelling at. We're out of the Europe track right now, but a 16.9 million, it's definitely saving you a lot of budget. There is some difficulty to how to spend that budget once you do put an Antonelli into your team, but for lower budget teams, for differentials, for your mini leagues where you're looking for those big swings, Kimi Antonelli in a Mercedes in Las Vegas this weekend, non-Europe, this one could be another good, strong performance for Kimi. Carlos Sainz, someone that I own in my team, again, fairly decent. Looks like he could get a price rise, meaning 3 points for 0.6. Don't have to burn a transfer. Williams, again, Mercedes power, so they could benefit a little bit from these cooler races, nighttime. We'll just have to see how they tune up their engines this week. Sometimes I find that Williams don't quite have the top line speed to get those overtakes and take advantage. Yes, they may qualify a little bit lower down, but don't really see them coming through the field too much. They do look as if they're more dominant than other teams down in the P16 area. They don't really seem to get the big gains where they can get from that into a points perspective. But having Sainz in my team is a okay hold, or at least consider for now. Now, the Racing Bulls of Hadra and Lawson, they tend to they are interested in me again this week. And the number one reason for them, for me, is their budget. Like at 5.7, 5.9, I don't have too much budget to play around with this week. But generally, they are drivers that I associate with those that can qualify pretty decent, not often going out in P3, get in that sort of Q2, Q1. Both have shown that they've got decent overtake potential. Again, fairly reliable car, doesn't suffer from too many unreliability issues. Lawson can tends to drive with his elbows out a little bit and can clip cars here or there. So he does provide me a little bit more risk. So generally, I feel has got good race performance, got good overtake ability, and can qualify pretty well. And once he qualifies pretty well, I generally find that he tends to hold those positions. So Hadjar is someone, again, from a differential perspective, that he may be someone that I look in. He's got really low percentage right now in terms of where the global percentage is, like at 20%. So if you're looking for cheaper assets, then Hadjar is someone that is on my radar for this week. Scrolling down here a little bit more, we have assets such as Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. And Aston's will be one of those teams that I anticipate are going to look pretty strong on FP1, probably FP as well. Aston Martins are a team that generally do get their straight line speed set up working pretty well on straight line speed sports. And a team that they very much get excited on Fridays and Saturdays, especially on these faster tracks. And I'm just heading into this weekend with a little bit of caution to know that at times I've seen Aston, they look really good day 1, day 2, but then free practice 3, qualifying, and even the race, they just tend to sit around and do meh. Aston is a bit of a tough one. Again, Alonso, if he's on it, he can get into Q3, qualifying P8, P9, TB10. But really, you're just hoping that he sticks around and gets a couple of those points, finishing points, and does good. Stroll, maybe. Stroll was one that I ran early on in the year, quite a few races. Again, one that I thought was in a better car than those around him, but would qualify low. And that's typically been his history this year, is that he generally cannot get out of Q3, finishes P17, 16, and qualifying. Can make up a few places in and around like overtakes and position gains, just around like pit stop times and things like that. but he never really fills me with much confidence that he can have a huge ceiling unless there's wet, unless there's chaos, and Stroll just tends to like take an early pit stop, takes up the situation, and somehow vaults himself into sort of a P7, P8, where he's still going to get good hauls for that weekend, but a lot of it's come from a positions gained perspective because he qualified so low. So there is a lot to like about Aston on faster weekends, but again, I think what I've learned is they need a lot of luck for their weekends to actually turn around. Not someone that I'm particularly excited to put in my team this week, but they are a team that, as I said, like everyone on the B tier list is in my thoughts this week, really depending on can we see any advantages in the free practice results. Okay, then. So, what can we do with my team? So, what can we look for from a team selection? This is my team, as I said, going into it. And like I said, anyone's really on the chopping block here. Like I could swap my two A drivers around to a different combo. I can switch my two constructors around to a different combo, or I could look to mix and match and do B tiers. If I was to walk into this team into Vegas and not make any transfers, I still would probably be pretty fine with this team. We've got Lando with race win opportunity, Russell, who also looks really good around Vegas, McLaren Mercedes, not really too much to hate about this combination right now. And then Alonso Ocon, we got some good veteran experience here. We got some good history here. Carlos has some good performances in the Ferrari in 2023 around Vegas. So I've got some popular assets in being over 50% owned. So any sort of disaster happened to these, I'm like in the same boat as a lot of people. So it's not really going to lose me too much. Ocon's my biggest differential right now. I'm not owning a Bearman, a Bortoleto, a Gasly, so I could still rock with Ocon again, try to take advantage of the Haas situation. But again, Haas, I'm not too sure about holding them for this week in Vegas, but that's where we are to start with. And I got 0.0 in the bank. I don't really have too much room, so if I need to make any decisions at this point in time, is taking out, if I want to make sort of wholesale changes, my biggest one is probably looking to take out Lando and gaining 1 million budget just by putting a max in, which may be one of my main considerations or the paths that I go down for this week. So getting max in gives me 1 million in the bank, and that helps me to make a couple of changes around my B tiers. Although there's not too much to be had with some of my budget and how things have been going. So taking Ocon out really doesn't get me an upgrade. I can still just move more of a downgrade move into saving money. Similar with the signs, it doesn't really gain too much from these positions. But as I said, there are some assets going into the start of the week that I'll be considering looking at, like Lawson's, Isaac Hadjar's part of that, Liam Lawson's part of that, even Nico Hulkenberg again, someone that I might consider depending on how things go. I don't really have any budget to get onto Oliver Bearman at this point. Again, it's going to need a second transfer to help me get some budget for that. So even if I was to take Russell out, put Bearman in, looking for those points potential and from a budget potential, leaves me 22.1, which really doesn't really get me any of the sort of other sort of prime B tier assets to bring in, even with a downgrade from Lando into Max. There's looking into a position where I could look into putting like a Kimi Antonelli into a team. So again, fairly decent team, a little bit risky. I'm not getting like a sort of a prime build with these, not having an Oscar or a George as my second. But Kimi, again, if he's showing just as good performances as out of that Mercedes, or Kimi has beaten Russell a couple of times in qualifying this year, so it's not out of the realm that he can't do it. It does leave 5.2 in the bank. It doesn't really give me any transfers to play around with that. But it does give me a final fix opportunity from this position to try and move into other options. A Bearman to Albon. Alex Albon could be done here. A Bearman to a Yuki, which is nice. You stick with Bearman in your team as someone that's going to get you that budget gain. If you could jump on to maybe someone like an Alex Albon and maybe take advantage of him qualifying at the back of the pack, maybe coming through with some overtake points, then this sort of maybe then helps to justify the Kimi and the Albon pick versus going with a sort of a typical prime A-tier asset. And look, there's a few teams like this that could be had. This one is definitely could be something that I could listen to. I could look to. Again, it puts me in a position where I'm splitting my chances over different assets. I've got a bit of McLaren, a little bit of Mercedes, a little bit of Red Bull. So sometimes that doesn't necessarily give you the biggest gains in a week, but it does help that if there are like a George Russell issue, if there's a particular Lando issue, then you're not quite getting it. You're just helping yourself out a little bit to avoid the worst of the worst. Now, we do have to consider again a situation at McLaren if they do look dominant. So any sort of triple McLaren build at this point would require me to swap around some of my B tiers here. I can get into there with a little bit of with two transfers as well. And if we'll be taking out signs depending on who's looking better on the weekend. And it just bring me into situations where you have to run an Alpine for this. So for me, this time around, it may be me going into sort of a Colapinto sort of version of a triple McLaren build. Again, I like it. This is, again, sort of banking on a situation where Red Bull are looking off. You don't quite trust the Mercedes at this point. You want to get a lot of the McLaren stocks. Then I still have the budget at mine to be able. Again, there are lots of different. I think sticking with a Russell and Norris gives me a little bit more opportunity to make some sort of smaller moves around my B tiers. Any of these sort of combinations, again, I think we have to take out a little bit of what we've learned over the years and try to just look a little bit more tunnel focus into a particular week. Because right now, for me, it just really is all about points and maximizing those points. So I definitely need to do a better job at that. I need to do a better job of using my final fix chip and autopilot as well to see if I can get the biggest bang for buck out of those as we head through these last three races. My chip strategy is probably going to be leaving autopilot for Qatar, basically for the next sprint race. I'll probably do that. And so it's deciding now whether it's got two races to use final fix. That'll be Vegas or Abu Dhabi. And yeah, I have to look for those. If there's going to be another slam dunk one, it's probably going to be because a Lando or an Oscar or a Max has qualified out of position, pit lane-ish type of thing. So I need to make sure I'm structuring my team a little bit more to plan for that. So I do need to leave a little bit of budget in my team. But if that's not possible, which is probably unlikely that it's going to happen, then I need to just look around a little bit more with these B tiers and seeing if I can make one move in a given week and see if it can name me an extra sort of 10 points-ish. And that would probably be the best I could probably hope for right now. But we'll have to see how things go. And it's probably going to have to be a gamble that I'm going to have to use it on. So drop me a comment below. Let me know what you're thinking for your teams. Let me know if you've got chips to play and what you're thinking. And like I said, subscribe. Let's get me to 500 before this fantasy season is out. That would be a great first season for me. And I look forward to catching you later this week. I'll look to do another shorter video after FP2 later this weekend just to give some final thoughts. And we will catch you on the next one.